Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and today's video is a bit more hard hitting, I think, for a number of reasons. But one of them is that we've seen this exact sort of move play out in the West, in America first, and then eventually all across Europe as well as in the UK, where because rape is such a big issue in a lot of Western societies, but not just Western societies, in African societies, it is insane. The thing is, all people are desperately trying to find a way to fix that. And of course, the way most people try to do that is through the law. The idea being that if we can solve the law issue, we should ultimately be able to solve the problem of rape in our societies. The story today, coming from the Daily Maverick, of course, is the ConCourt. And the ConCourt is currently hearing a case that seeks to redefine what consent means in sexual offense cases. Now, it's very interesting here that we have the Embrace Project along with a survivor of rape that is speaking on this problem, and they pushed their case all the way to the Constitutional Court of South Africa with the fundamental idea that they need to change how the Constitution is interpreted and what the law says. Now, what does the law currently say? Currently, as the law exists, a perpetrator or the legal system needs to prove that first the perpetrator had the intent to rape, but secondly, that there was no consent as far as the perpetrator was concerned. Okay, so first, you wanted to rape the girl, but also that there was no consent from your perspective. So it doesn't ask for an objective sort of examination of what consent could look like or what non consent could look like. So it's not up to the courts to determine whether or not consent was indeed given. The courts can only really decide whether or not you, the perpetrator, felt like consent was given or not. You can understand why this language is rather problematic. The first part, not so much. Someone needs to have intent. That's literally intent is intent is 2/3 of the law. Pretty much all laws that we have in this world are based on intent. There must be some kind of intent for you to commit murder. Otherwise, it can be manslaughter, or sometimes it's nothing. And the same is true. So the first part doesn't really matter that much. The second part, you can understand why some issues around this would exist, because it might be that the person in question said no. It might be that the person in question had a genuine psychological response that would cause something like freezing, which is an accepted response that happens. If you're in that moment, a lot of women completely freeze up and there's nothing that they could do. It could be that afterwards doctors examine the patient and find that there's significant damage that would be in line with someone going through such a traumatic experience. All of this can be present, and the court still can only go, did the accuser or the accused here, did the accused actually know that no consent was given? And all the accused here have to do is say, well, I don't know, right? So South Africa has a ton of rape cases every single year. Just between 2022 and 2023, we had 42,780 cases reported. Of that, only 1.38% actually resulted in successful prosecutions. That is quite troubling. It means that even if a woman is willing to step forward and actually make a case at the police station, the chances of conviction is very, very low. And oftentimes, what happens in this stuff is after the killer, or not the killer, but the rapist is sort of set free, they might seek some kind of revenge on the person that took them to court. Now, I need to make my own feelings about rape very, very clear. I believe that if you are convicted of rape, you should get the death penalty. I don't believe that you should go to jail. In many ways, I view rape as a human crime far worse than murder. Murder is terrible, and it is the ultimate crime because you are taking a life that doesn't belong to you. the life belongs to God and you had no right to take it. But rape, the person who went through it has to live with it. At least in the case of murder, you're gone, right? So yes, your loved ones have to live with it, but you yourself are no longer going to suffer. So I actually think if we're going to have the death penalty for murder, which I think we should have the same for rape. Okay, so that's just my own feelings on this. The case itself is very, very interesting. And reading through this entire article, you can see I marked a bunch of stuff here because there's a lot of stuff that stood out to me that I just wanted to reread a couple of times. The case itself, very, very interesting. But there is a problem within the case. And one of the judges actually highlighted this problem in saying that it seems like we're trying to fix a deep-seated flaw in our society by simply changing the law. The question that we should ask isn't, why are so many people not getting prosecuted for rape? We should ask ourselves, why are so many people getting raped in South Africa in the first place? Now, some of that will be due to prosecutions with people sort of committing repeat offenses because they can get away with it and they know how easy it would be to get away with it. I mean, it's a 98% sort of accusal rate, right? So you can imagine how easy it would be for someone to just go, yeah, I'll do it again because I know I can get away with it. But there is definitely a problem in our society. And I know the people in this case wants to make it out as if the problem is patriarchal, right? And the patriarchy is to blame. I would argue that it is the exact opposite of the patriarchy that is to blame. Across the world, everywhere, we see the exact same results and statistics play itself out. Countries that have a high rate of marriage, where the mother and the father stay together and the children grow up in a home with the father and the mother both present, have very, very low instances of crime. When this rate starts to reverse itself, we see a trend. We see crime increase. Eventually, we see things like murder and rape increase. We see poverty increase. We see a general unraveling of society. Now, here I want to speak specifically to the men in South Africa and why men in South Africa are struggling as much as they are. You see, over 60%, it's 64% of men in South Africa, or children rather, in South Africa. There's no specific result for men and women, but over 64% of kids in South Africa grow up without the father in the home. Why is this significant? Well, a young man learns from his father how to be a man. It is his father that teaches him responsibility. It is his father that teaches him service, that eventually becomes work, and that eventually becomes helping his fellow man. It is his father that teaches him how to treat his mother, and through that, teach him how to treat other women. When you remove the father from the home, as is very often the case in South Africa, mainly because of how the government's reward structures play out, if a woman is unmarried and she has kids, the government give her a lot of money, or at least a lot more than if she was poor but married. And so a lot of women actually see this as a viable way to get money from the state, is to not get married. We also have a massive problem in this country with sex outside of marriage, which leads to children, right? This is basic facts. You can taste it. It's all over the world. We see it everywhere. And if you have that high a percentage of young men growing up without a father in the home, it's no surprise that these young men aren't going to know what no means, because they will have no respect, not just for women, they'll have no respect for anyone. The fact that it's not just rape in this country that is out of control, but things like murder. Think back to the White House, where the best Ramaphosa could come up with was, oh, South Africa doesn't have a genocide of white farmers. We just murder each other constantly. Because that was the most honest thing Ramaphosa could say in the entire thing, was that, hey, we murder each other a lot, because that's how high crime rates are. In South Africa, things are stolen left, right, and center. Every single one of you knows this. If you were to leave your bag for like a minute unattended in Johannesburg or even in Cape Town Central, that bag is gone and you're never seeing it again. You compare that to places in, like, for example, in Singapore or in Japan or in South Korea, or even some places in Europe where you can leave your stuff unattended and no one will ever even think of taking it. All of it comes back to this. What was the formational years of your life like? Did you have an example? Did you have someone that you could look towards and say, this is my inspiration. I want to model myself after this human being. And it's not enough for a mother, because a mother cannot teach a son how to not, or how to respect women. And that's not to say that there aren't many, many men who grow up without fathers in the home and become relatively successful and they don't turn into rapists or criminals. But the statistics bear it out. Overwhelmingly, more than 90%, I believe, of people in prison are comprised of people who grew up without fathers in the home. The vast majority of perpetrators in almost every country on earth of criminals are people who grew up without a father in the home. This is significant. And the problem with this bill and this legislation specifically is the way in which they're wishing to change that. You see, they want to make it so that consent has to be explicit. And that's where it sort of falls apart. Anyone who grew up and went to college or university will know that that's not how consent works, right? You go out, you get drunk, or you have a couple of drinks, you and the girl, you go back home, and it's understood, right? Both of you are happy and you're there because it's fun and you both enjoy it. That's great. That's how it happens for young people. It shouldn't. We shouldn't be having sex outside of wedlock, but we do. And that's just the reality of South African life, or rather of modern life. The issue is, with this new law, you'd have to stop in the midst of passion while you're kissing to stop and say, hey, would you sign this form? Because you have to be able, this is what they're trying to push for. You need to be able to prove in court that consent was explicitly given. So what? You have to be able to say that they did say yes. Well, that would just be he said, she said. And then the court would be able to go, well, she said she didn't say yes. He said she did say yes. Who do we believe? It's literally, it's not going to lead to anything, right? If the judge is fair, the judge is going to go, well, this case, I have no beyond reasonable doubt confirmation that this guy is guilty, so I can't prosecute him, right? And on the same side, if you have an unfair judge, the accused that may be completely innocent will also be found guilty because the judge decided that they're going to believe the girl before they believe the man. And it also opens the door, and this is perhaps the biggest problem, it opens the door for people who deal with regret. And this does happen, by the way, where a woman might go out, might have a couple of drinks. In the moment, she's really up for it. She wants to have sex. The next morning, she wakes up, and now she feels guilty. She feels terrible about what she did the previous night. And now, instead of saying, well, I had some fun, now she says, I've been raped. Well, what do you do now, right? You didn't get explicit consent. She was up for it at the time. Now she isn't. And you didn't get explicit consent. So now you're guilty of rape just because the girl changed her mind? How does that work? Right? How do you apply this? And I'm not making a case here for the law shouldn't be changed or whatever, because I do think the law currently doesn't really work. But we have to change our society. Our society is falling apart because there's a lack of values within our society, not because the law isn't being applied correctly. And until we can fix that lack of moral values within our society, no amount of tinkering with the law will ever change that. As always, hit the like if you liked, just if you didn't. Massive shout out and thank you to all of the patrons as well as the YouTube channel members. To become a member, just hit the join button right below this video. And as always, I will see all of you in the next one. A peace.